This is Rugby Unity. I am David Pembroke and Ewen McKenzie. Before we get into the detail and the discussion of last weekend, can I just express on behalf of rugby fans around the world my gratitude to the players, to the coaches, to the administrators, to the support staff, to everybody who competed this weekend. My wife is away at the moment in Europe, and so I got to watch so much rugby over the weekend. I was just completely... it was compelling. It was so good to watch. So we don't often say thank you to the players and the coaches and everybody else, but I'm really grateful for what they put out there on the weekend. It was very, very enjoyable. But the big dance was at Eden Park on Saturday afternoon. And Ewen McKenzie, what was your assessment of the All Blacks 24 points to 17 win over the Springboks?
I mean, it was a tense game and a physical game. The All Blacks got out and South Africa chasing. They just struggled. I thought South Africa struggled, and I think I felt they're only getting into their game style with 20 minutes to go. That's what it felt like. And suddenly it became a competitive last period of the game, but I felt like they were just hanging in there. New Zealand did a great job on the South African line-out. I mean, South Africa is just not winning line-out ball. They haven't all series. And that's they rely on possession to be able to play the game they want to play. So they haven't had the scrum dominance. There was one fantastic scrum from South Africa that's resulted in a try, but apart from that, they haven't had the dominance that they're used to. Malherbe, the tight end prop, who was always first picked, he's obviously been injured earlier in the year. And I think they might be missing him because he was always first picked. Doesn't matter what combination they picked, he was always in the team. He's not there, and I think that's affected their scrum. And line out, the opposition teams are doing a really good job putting pressure on, so they're just not getting any decent possession. And so then they're relying on playing off, turnover ball or whatever, and they're not really set up for that scenario, especially the way the backs are selected. I think it was a good effort by New Zealand. They hung on in the end, but a really good effort from the New Zealand forwards in particular for me. And I thought, I've got a different perspective now on Parker. The back row played really well as a six. Satiti was good too. So I thought a really good, really well balanced back row, and a really good performance by the second row at line-out time. And the scrum was good enough, so that was enough to get them home. So, a lot of pressure on South Africa now.
And Eddie Jones, what was your assessment of the All Blacks win over South Africa?
Well, it was such an intriguing game. It kept me up till 1 a.m. Sacramento time. I really enjoyed it. Like good contests. Big contest in the air, big contest on the ground. Yeah, New Zealand won most of the contests. Yeah, there's that one scrum, as Ewan alluded to, where Vilko Low came on and absolutely powered through the All Black scrum, which got South Africa back in the game. But it was a typical sort of Eden Park, rain sweeping in, very slippery. And New Zealand were obviously, they were... I don't like using the term, but they were desperate to win. It's a huge game for them with the Eden Park history and all that sort of thing. So it was a huge game. They played to win. I thought by chance, Finlay Christie played 9 because of injuries, and he was absolutely suited to those conditions. Big physical halfback, pretty good kicking game, looked very composed, whereas, as Ewan said, South Africa struggled to win any areas in the game and really just hung in there. And at the end, they went back to their one-off, same-way type attack in those conditions. And, it looked like they could win the game at some stage. But I was saying to myself when that last South African attack came, I was saying you can't put enough money on the fact that it's going to be a jackal penalty.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Can't put enough money, and because they do referee the defence more on the line. They look at the defence on the onside, but then they also look at the defence the attack sealing off. so they're looking for a jackal penalty. And Sevilla's obviously a highly skilled player. I'm not saying it wasn't a jackal, but if you could get the sports tab then you wanted to make money, that was the time to bet on the jackal.
New Zealand benefited. That early try sort of took the pressure off a little bit. Imagine if they'd been duking it out for 20, 30 minutes and not much on the scoreboard. That early try was in a way a relief and allowed them, and they're up 10-0, and so that allowed them to use the scoreboard pressure, and I think they gave them a lot of confidence. And as I said, their line-out effort was terrific in terms of putting pressure on the Springboks. They never got any decent ball to play with, so that that was a really important part. I actually made a note at half-time. I always make a note at half-time saying, what do I think? I wrote a Caterpillar Fest. That's what I wrote. It was just a festival of Caterpillar rucks. That's what it was. Both sides setting up these Caterpillar rucks. I'm sort of thinking, yeah, right. But that's what the conditions dictated, and that's what the nature of the contest. So, and as Eddie said, New Zealand made the best of those contests in the end, and that was enough.
So if you're looking at it through that context, though, as we've been discussing over the last couple of weeks in terms of developing the team, looking towards 2027 and developing your side, what would you have taken out of the match for both the Springboks and for the All Blacks in terms of points that people could be looking to in terms of, how the teams are developing?
Well, I think they're not. For South Africa, they're not where they were. Their game relies on sort of dominant set piece and being able to out muscle and generate penalties and things like that. Penalties from driven lineouts and stuff. So they weren't able to even get to that. So they got to look at their set piece. We saw that brilliant scrum effort with Wilco coming on. He made a difference there. So they've got to work out what their best scrum is, minus some of the seasoned players. So that's part of it. But in the backs, Willie LaRue was there to sort of provide cohesion, but I think he missed narrow on that first try. He just basically fell over him or stepped over him. He just got up with the ball and they score in the corner. So I don't know if he provided the eyes and ears that they were probably hoping in the game control. He did pop in and make a few decisions there, but I don't think that's a long-term solution for them. So I think they've got to start looking at their backline and start working out what it's going to look like and stick with something there. That the chopping and changing probably doesn't help. The midfield they were game, but there's something missing there. And I make notes, but I said the backline cohesion was really poor in the attacking 20-25. Like when they got up there and they're in a position, the cohesion just wasn't there, and it hasn't been all series. So this wasn't a one-off game thing. It's been that way the whole time. So I don't know what's changed. I don't know, but it doesn't seem to be much cohesion there, and maybe it's just they just don't have the dominance that they've used to up front to be able to play on the front foot. And teams are being competitive at the tackle, so they're not getting the front football they're probably used to.
Yeah. And for you, Eddie Jones, in terms of pluses and minuses that you would have seen there that are significant in terms of the development of either side?
Well, I think you look at that game as a one-off, but I think, as Ewan said, I think New Zealand will be happy that Parker looks like he can be a quality back rower. He's played a couple of tests now, and he looked good in that test. He looked dominant. He's big. He's physical. Satiti's, played a few tests now, but again looked pretty useful. And as Ewan said, that back row had good balance, so they'll be pleased with that. I think for South Africa, I thought when Sasha came on at 10, he looked okay, but he doesn't have the cohesion with Delandi and Creel, who are used to playing a certain way. And that's one of they're in that stage now, and we spoke about it a little last time, where they've won a lot of games based on playing attritional rugby. And at some stage there's a clamour for that team, the winning team, to play better rugby. There's no doubt about it. And Rassie's alluded to that. He made that off the cuff comment about Australia playing like South Africa did in 2019,
Yeah.
alluding to the fact. But to do that, it's going to take some time. And with South Africa always expected to win, bringing those young players in, as he did in the first test against Australia, in numbers, puts you massively at risk, because they lack that experience at test level. Like we were just looking at one situation we had on the weekend where we had a ruck just outside the 22. We got a 9 who's played 20 minutes of test rugby and a 10 who doesn't play 10 for his club. And instead of manufacturing a ruck so we can put the ball out or put a contest kick, we kick long off the 10, which means the ball goes back 10 metres. We've got no chase, and they come back into our 30 quickly. That's where you see the difference in experience in players, those moments in the game. But I thought Sasha looked dynamic. Who else? And the front row, mate. Front row, Ewen was saying before you came on, like Australia's benefited from having Swali and Jorgensen as match winners, right?
Yeah.
South Africa's front row used to be their match winners. They'd have Malherbe steady as a rock, Marks or Bongi. And you think the damage Marks used to do after Bongi used to scrummage hard for 40 minutes.
Yeah.
He was a beast of a hooker. Well, he's coming off now. Malherbe's injured. Lou said they had power there as well. And now they don't have that. So they don't have that match winning up front. And who's their match winner out the back? They don't really have anyone of absolute quality at the moment. So what do? You just got to find the way to win. So go back to finding a more of a South African game with a bit of balance in it. I think they've tried to take a ride out and they'll come back to a balanced game.
They lost that Stephen Kitsoff as well, though. The red-headed loose head. He was right up there in terms of he was a terrific player off the bench. So with him and Malherbe out, you suddenly they're two world-class players are suddenly not there anymore through injury, and that's it just takes the edge off what was a winning part of their formula, something they could rely on. They haven't been able to get anything out. The scrums have been, the Australia and New Zealand they handled the scrum all right, even though they might have been backpedaling at times. It just said that that was that one scrum we talked about already that's been the most decisive scrum we've seen in the championship so far. Other than that, everyone's been able to pretty much get their possession. When you look at the statistics, that's how it shows. So the line-out was decisive in terms of not being able to get quality ball for me. And then their game doesn't. They don't have so much X factor. The Colby was quiet in the game, so I think New Zealand directed the game pretty well. He didn't get too many opportunities to shine. So and they just fundamental errors. The passing errors. They passed into touch a couple of times. Just missing guys. So they're the things that we didn't see in the past, but they're there now, and that's what they've got to deal with.
So
the other point is, then I was saying to Eddie. Quagga Smith is a really dynamic player. He came on and went straight off into a yellow card situation, put them back under pressure. In the last 2 tests, he's given away 2 penalties straight up in both games, straight off the bench. So he started the last one, but so he's the discipline side of the game is still an important one, and it didn't help them. I think they actually scored a try with 1 man down, but it doesn't really help them when they're trying to rebuild. You've got you're under pressure in other ways.
So the teams are headed to Wellington. How does Rassie manage the psychology of the side? He's going to be picking his team this afternoon, 6 p.m. New Zealand time. How does he manage the week now that, the heat starts to really come on around that expectation of winning? We're trying to change a team. How would you go about that if you were Rassie Erasmus, Ewen McKenzie?
Well, if you discount the first try, the game was pretty competitive, so he'll be selling that. But I think they've got to fix the line out. They've got to get some quality ball out of there to be able to play the game, whatever they want to do. They're getting, taps and sort of ball bouncing and things. They're not getting anything clean coming out there, if at all. So they've got to sort that out, and might give them the confidence then to be able to play. But it destroys any rhythm in how they seek to play. So I'd be focusing on that. I think they'll make it. There'll be technical solutions there. In terms of selection, I don't know. I don't know that Willie Leroy's going to be the answer for them long term anyway. So I think whether you're making a different investment at fullback and get on with it, I don't see that they'll change too much. Maybe they'll change the tight end based on that good scrum. You got to reward things when things are done well. So there'll be some subtle changes there, I'd say. But technically, I think they've just got to fix their line out. That'll give them a chance.
Well, but what about the morale piece? What about the sort of external getting in, starting to put the pressure
away.
on?
They're away, so it's an advantage to be on the road.
Yeah.
If you're at home, it'd be much more complicated. Yeah, they'll be the media. The media will be, the chooks will be following around trying to get something, but in the end that'll be managed. You can manage them. They're pretty quiet. I never see the South African players much on interviews and stuff like that. So they're pretty internalised anyway. So they'll bunker down in Wellington, and they'll just focus on, I think, getting the technical part right, and then obviously Rassie's got to get the selection bit. He's got to try and manage that. It's a bit of an octopus for him, because sometimes if having lots of players is sometimes harder. And you try and overthink it. Sometimes if you got a pretty empty cupboard, the selections look after itself. And if you look at, they do, because if you look at the Australians, we'll talk more about that. But a lot of the best performing players for Australia at the moment are all in the team because of other injuries. They weren't in there. They're not the first choice. If someone got injured and they got to go, and geez, they look all right, So. So that's what happens. I'm specifically talking about Pollard and Hooper and these guys. I mean, those guys weren't even starting for the Brumbies, so at the start of the year. But they're sort of like first choice now and starring. Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. Sometimes coaches, sometimes you overthink it, and sometimes the injuries force you to do things, and you go, let's solve that problem. And so I think Rassie probably needs a little bit of that. But injuries might fix it up for him.
And Eddie Jones, for you, how would you be thinking about managing the week in the context that we see of South Africa not delivering the victories and perhaps not quite delivering the performances that the South African fans would be expecting?
Well, I think in the context, on the outside looks like a difficult week, but Rassie would be loving this. Like it's a great opportunity to show everyone they can go again. So he'd be organised. He'd know what he'd need to work on, whether it be the line out. He'd have a plan for that, and they just get about the business. And they've got enough experienced players there to know what's important and what's not important. And I reckon they'd be loving it, mate. There's no better place to win than in New Zealand after you got beaten. So he'd be just priming the players, a couple of good training runs, one with a bit of intensity, probably golf on Thursday, captain's run Friday, and rip in on Saturday. And again, like Ewen said, you take the first try looked, it had an element of luck about it because it looked like Willie Leroux slipped over. The play was covered. It wasn't executed that well. He had to dive to catch the ball. He slipped over, and then they scored the try. The second try was a good set-piece try where the throw was almost perfect, and the receiver was able to take it nice and square, which gave him the inside option, and he was just able to beat Malcolm Marx through his pace and power, and Jordan, Jordan's got that. So that was a good try, so you'd give him that. Yeah. But then the other try had an element of luck, so he'd be selling that. I don't know. Who's the referee?
Don't know. I'll check that. We'll see if we can find out and bring it back. But I don't know who the referee is.
Dono's probably pretty good. Dono might be pretty good.
Dono.
But and he'd be looking at the referee, whether he fires up on Twitter. Puts a bit of pressure on the referee. I've heard a whisper that he's been told to pull his head in about that because he was definitely having an effect on the referees. let's not beat around the bush. If you put that much pressure on him in social media, that'll have an effect. Now, maybe he's been told to pull his head in, so he's not going to do that. It'd be an interesting week. He'd be loving it, mate. He'd be absolutely loving it.
Excellent. All right. Well, listen, before that match, we enjoyed another contest. Australia slow out of the blocks, but Ewen McKenzie, they got there in the end. Where was your head at right at the end of the game there in terms of that decision-making? Were you thinking draw? Were you thinking attack? Were you thinking win? What was your thoughts going through that?
For me, the momentum of the game had gone Australia's way. I mean, they scored 3 tries in the second half and Argentina scored 3 points. So I felt the momentum of the game was there. It didn't surprise me. I said to someone, this will be one in the 84th minute, 85th. You can just tell because you're going to get into the 30 phases of whatever, and that happens, and then you go through and Argentina were probably lucky not to have yellow cards in that period. So in that last period of the game, they could have easily been playing against 13. So I felt that the pressure was there. Everything was on Australia's side to keep taking the options. The question is, normally they go to touch, but they took the taps, which I thought was interesting, and they kept them in front of the posts, and that kept. But I sort of wasn't surprised. But the game was there at the end. The first half I felt was Argentina, and then the second half became Australia, and they in the end it's the 80. Well, it's the 80. You got to play for 80 minutes, as they say. Well, they had to play for 85. That's what the game dictated. But they just too much pressure in the end. So 4 tries to 2, that tells the story.
Yeah, and for you, Eddie, where were you? What were you thinking as you saw that the clock wind down? The options were clearly there to take the points, to deliver the draw. Team seemed to be keen to go forward. What was your assessment of that particular time period? Because certainly Joe Schmidt said you've really just got to leave it to the players on the field to make the decisions and the leaders on the field to make those decisions because they're the ones who are closest to the contest.
Oh, I think, as we spoke about, we felt Argentina would get out quickly, and they did. And they play that high-intensity swing attack, and it works really well at the start of games, but it's so hard to keep doing for 80 minutes because the outside backs are covering a lot of ground, and the accuracy of your support play falls off through fatigue, and we saw that they dropped off a fair bit. And Australia just kept at it, mate, just kept going, and obviously Wilson felt they had them. And with Paul Williams, again, that he's going to look after the attacking team fairly well. So you get near the line, there was, I don't know how many penalties it was for offside, at either end. Yeah. So, you always got another chance, and they just backed themselves, which is good for a young team, I reckon. And, as Joe said, coaches see it, but the players feel it, so you got to go with how they feel.
And from your assessment of the Australian team and their performance, what did you take from that?
Well, I think as Joe said after that first lines test, they've developed a fair bit of resilience now as a group. They've been together for 2 years, primarily under Wilson as captain. They hang in games, they stick in games, and they got 2 match winners, as Ewan said, in Sawali and Jorgensen. Like every time, I think, as Tim Horan said, every time Jorgensen gets the ball, something's going to happen. And he's got such good touch. He's got lovely touch. Like he's one of those players that, there's some players kick the ball ahead and it always rolls over the dead ball. You know who they are, and they're the coach killers. And you got some players who kick the ball and it just dribbles and it stays there. Like Joe Roth, apart from when he didn't have his headphones, he was one of those players that could drop the ball anywhere. Like when he didn't have his headphones, the ball would go everywhere. He's lucky to keep it in the park. But he's one of those Jorgensen. And Sawali is like outstanding. He scores tries. You got 2 blokes that can score tries out of nothing. Like little things. And with a hard-working pack now, I think, McGrath's really developing in the top class 7. Wilson played well. Hooper fitted in well into that tight lock role. And the scrums, hanging in there, staying in there. And that Zane Nongor has improved enormously. Like, he must be the most improved player in Australian rugby. Real credit too.
Yeah. So for you, Ewan, who would you pick out of that Australian team who caught your eye on Saturday?
Well, we've talked about the match winners. The scrum was good, so Robinson did a good job, and Tupou in the first half. Obviously, they changed at half time. Tupou was like, I wrote him down for like he had 2 penalties and 2 poor passes in the first half. So he was rocks and diamonds in terms of his contribution. He's got the no arms tackles, which is not new if you've watched. That's something he's going to have to try and fix up, because that's fairly obvious. So he needs to tidy that up. But the back rows was good. They're all involved in the game and contributing in different ways. I made a note of Wilson. We made that breakdown that we got the ball down the short side, then he put it straight on the boot. He's a guy that engaged. He's got a high skill level, and so he's not afraid to use it. I don't know if the kick was look good in hindsight. I wonder if it'd be better to hang on and build pressure, but that's how he plays. If he sees a skill opportunity, he'll take it, and it's all moment in the moment stuff, but he's got skill solutions to lots of things. So that's what he brings to the game. So Ali's, I like that he's one of these guys, because he's come across, they've probably worked hard on him at the breakdown, whatever. He hits the rucks and stuff pretty hard. He's very aggressive in that area, so he's trying to be a complete player in there, not to be a liability. I really like the passion that he puts into his breakdown work and whatever. So the same as he puts into his ball carries. So he was good. Liner, I felt, played. He just played deep, and the game improved. I think when O'Connor came on, I think that they played more on the front foot towards the end there. So just in terms of where the game, because Argentina, they were pressing well. And so I felt that's why we didn't function as well in the first half. We're probably playing on the back foot a little bit and a little bit too deep. Kellaway was good. I thought he was a good replacement. I like his first instincts to counter-attack, which I like. So you do get the odd mistake there, but his instincts is to take the ball forward, which I think suits an Australian way of playing. So there was good bits and pieces there. Toole probably didn't have the same impact. He was targeted pretty heavily by Argentina, and they got to him pretty well. But he didn't concede or give up or whatever. But he wasn't able to do as much as he did against South Africa. So on the whole, Hooper was good. The front row in the end, the Pollard at hooker has been a bit of a find, because he was like ranked 3 or 4 like last year. As I say, he wasn't even starting at the Brumbies, and I could never work out why, because I think he's a pretty good player. And now he's there, he's sort of making that spot, and no one's talking about the old. He's just out there every week, and they attach different props to him, and he keeps going. And the props are looking good too, So Nongor, I've been a bit of a fan of him. I saw him scrum a few years back against the Groot from New Zealand, and did really well in the Super Rugby. And from that moment on, I've always watched him to see how he goes. And I think he's improved. He's a very good player. So he's very good around the park. He can carry and do all those sorts of things. But in the end, the scrum was the area he had to improve. And I think he looked really good technically in the second half. So, so there's lots to like about all of that. And I think having Tizano on the bench was good, because he was able to come in and maintain that intensity of the breakdown. And all of those things contributed to the fact that Australia dominated in the second half enough to be able to then get that win, or they catch up and then get the win. So Argentina will be disappointed they let that one go.
So just in terms of Argentina, what insights can we take from the narrow loss?
Well, I think that they I love their style of play, but as Eddie said, it's in terms of being able to. It's a very aerobic style of play, and they have those late arriving deep runners that they're able to feed, and that gives them the extra man on. That's difficult to do across 80 minutes. So they need to be able to move in and out of that style a little bit. I thought they might be a little bit more robust, and be more direct driving sort of plays and whatever. We didn't quite get there. We saw that against New Zealand, Matera and those guys. They carried really well in close, and they did explore right at the start of the game. You could see them exploring right in behind the ruck. They were almost angling in behind into the air. They're trying to get to Nick White or whatever, but they're trying to get in their space. But they only did that for 5 minutes, and then they started shifting wider again. So I didn't think they brought their forwards into the game as runners as well, and that was the big difference from the week before. Their forwards were able to run at the All Blacks and put a lot of pressure on that way, and they were hard to contain. I didn't think that they brought those guys into the game, probably a little bit too lateral, and then ran out of juice to run that game and never got back to the other. So, so they're not far away. In the end, it could have gone either way. It could have easily been a knock on. Argentina wins, and it's a different discussion. So they'll be disappointed, but they won't be dismayed, and they'll be back trying to do their best next week.
And for you, Eddie, looking at Argentina, what was your assessment of the good and the bad that they would take out of Saturday?
I think, as Ewan said, Australia's bench finished really strongly, and they definitely dominated the Argentinian bench. And if you look at Argentina, firstly, they got their style of play, which is difficult to continue for 80 minutes. It's not impossible, but difficult to do. And then secondly, the quality of their bench would be something you'd have to look at. But again, you can only pick who you got. We don't know who they got. So, but they were visibly outplayed in the last 20 minutes of the game. Again, the positives of how well they played early on, they scored, 2 beautiful first-phase tries, which if you think about it, you had the 2 first-phase tries from Argentina, then you had the 2 first-phase tries from New Zealand. That, for one team, that set them up to win the game in heavy, wet conditions with a referee that favours contest. And in the second game in Australia, in warm conditions with a referee that favours attack, and Australia were able to get possession, they were able to put a lot of pressure on Argentina and just nipped them at the end. So, I think they'd be fairly positive about disappointed but positive.
Yep, very good. Well, listen, we will certainly be talking about the preview of the upcoming matches later this week on the Friday. But before we leave Townsville, my obsession with the engagement with the fans, I certainly saw it there from the Australian team after the game, signing the autographs, spending the time. And indeed, in the Sydney Morning Herald, they wrote an article commenting and commending the Australian players on their engagement with the fans. And that certainly makes a big difference because there was a pretty decent crowd, I thought. It looked to be, 25,000 there in Townsville. It looked to be a hot afternoon, but that's a rugby league heartland, and that's a decent-sized crowd. Yeah, go on, Ewan.
Mate, I got a bit frustrated. I was watching the stand coverage. I got a bit frustrated because there were moments in the game where things happened and they never showed it. They never replayed it. So there's things that happened and someone would be admonished or they'd turn the penalty around and you'd never see what it was. They'd never actually go back and play. I don't know what was going on. I don't know who was doing the camera work. It was very different. Normally you get too many shots. There was parts of that game we never saw again, yet critical decisions were reversed or whatever, and we never saw actually what it was. I made a couple of points about that. At the end of the first half, Argentina scrum, and it goes back to our long discussion, they're right there, hot on attack, Australia's line, and he comes up with a free kick for the break foot. Like he says to the Argentinian hooker, you didn't have your break foot out.
Yeah.
They've taken the scrum as an option on the penalty. They're 5 metres out just before half time. You ice the game there on the scoreboard, and he comes up with a break foot, fucking break foot. This is where I'm saying that there was scrum contest at times, and then suddenly we drifted back into this sort of free kick, and it was just before half time. And then we got a whole bunch at the end too. It just went into free kick. So it's such a lottery about whether the scrum's important. And I even made a note at some point. They said, the Argentina only had 12 scrums on their own ball in 2 games. So I don't know where the scrum's sitting in the game anymore. It's not even featuring numerically. And then you've got all these sort of arbitrary things going on. So I love the fact that South Africa were able to use it and got that try off the back of it. That was great. I've seen it in the women's game. But the rest of the games, it just seems to be drifting in and out. So it'd be nice if the World Rugby sort of decided what they want to do about it. And, And the other thing was the shot clock. Was it my impression that the shot clock seemed to be very quick at times? I don't. How does it work? You nominate that you're going to shoot a goal and you got 60 seconds. Is that how it works, Eddie? Because on the first shot of goal, it's like you had no time at all. Oh,
but just on what Nick's saying, I reckon he's 100% right, mate. Remember, you used to get a report card in year 6, right? And you get say you got an A for physical education, you got a C for maths and English. Your parents wouldn't be happy, right? But Mum, I got an A for PE. I'm doing okay. I reckon the referees have got a report card now that weights heavily having safe non-contest scrums, almost not having resets, not having mucking around in the scrums, which you need because the scrums are contest. And I reckon we're going down the wrong track here. We're taking it out of the game. There's a subtle movement to take the scrum out of the game as a contest. And, because that, as Ewen alluded to, that technicality at half time for the break foot, that is ridiculous. Oh. That is ridiculous in that situation. Where they've got a dominant scrum, they get penalised for break foot. Well, you can almost penalise every scrum for that if you wanted to. I know there's a safety factor to it, but that is ridiculous because then you're going to have to referee the contest. Yeah.
The scrum never even impact. You just said, your foot's not in the right spot, so free kick. I'm going. It's a critical moment of the game. If he did that at the end of the game in that last period, Australia's trying to catch up. They're taking. You come up with some cockamamie free kick for something that you wouldn't get out of town. I couldn't believe it. I'm just talking about the game itself here, not about Argentina or Australia or anything else. I'm just talking about how the game looks. And that, for me, that was – so they go off at half time and everyone's going – if you're sitting at the stadium, you wouldn't have a clue what happened then. They're about to pack a scrum. Argentina's put in 5 metres out. He plays free kick and then everyone walks off the field. And you go, what happened then? Yeah. And then complicated by the fact that Stan didn't replay half the stuff, half the controversial moments enough for you to even come up with an opinion. I can't even tell you some of them because they never replayed them. Yeah.
So Eddie Jones, you're suggesting that that's a policy decision, or is that where is it coming from, or how is it coming into the game? So you believe that it's a deliberate directive from World Rugby to reduce the role of the scrum in the game. Is that what you're saying?
I think it's a subtle direction, mate. Subtle direction to give the referees take the contest out of the scrums. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we got it. Yeah, but who's it?
Well, we can't have
where
that.
Does the direction? Hang on, but where does it have that? Where does the direction come from? Like, is it Brett sitting there in his office? I don't know, but what we can't do is have the referees, who many of them have never even put their head in a scrum, deciding about where the scrum sits relevant in its relevance to the game. I understand safety in that, but they can't phase it out because they're trying to make it easier for them to manage. You get my drift? Yeah. Like the scrum's an integral part. Right. You can't phase it out because we're trying to get all these boxes that we can tick so that we get the report card after the game. We can't just it shouldn't be up to the referees to decide where the scrum sits in the recognition of the game as a game of rugby. Like, if it needs to come from Brett or someone higher up needs to make that, but it needs to have coaches and other people involved in the game, involved in the discussion. It can't just be left to the refereeing community to decide that we can just free kick our way out of this problem to make our report cards look better.
So, Eddie,
to make it look easier.
Eddie, how long do you think that this has been coming into the game? Has it been last 12 months, last 6 months? When When have we started to
I've
see
seen
that?
I've seen more of it this year. If you just think back as a contrast, right, when South Africa were at their best, winning the last World Cup, how many times on their ball the ball would sit at lock and it just sit there and they just grind and then they'd go and they'd get a penalty. The penalty would then go to touch. Then they'd have a maul and invariably they get a penny from that, and that's how they'd win games of rugby. Now teams are very rarely penalised if they collapse the scrum in that situation. I'm not saying that they're not, but they're very so. And then they're told to play away. Like we had a situation, we won 4 scrum penalties against the USA, and we're winning the scrum contest. We had a 5-metre scrum, right? So we keep the ball in, we go up on the left, marginally ahead of the right, and we get penalised. We get penalised just because the natural rule of the scrum takes the left up anyway. And we're both going forward and we're winning the contest and we get penalised. And again, if you're a spectator, you've got no idea what's going on. The only good thing it was an open-air stadium so they could hear what I was saying.
But anyway, there's stuff to be sorted out there because it's just not like if you're a fan, I get it. I can see what's going on, but a lot of people who haven't played in the scrum but recognise the scrum as part of the game. And I get they don't want to see 10,000 resets either. I understand that. But there's something's awry there that I don't like the direction because you may as well not bother. So you may as well, as I said, we'll just start putting back rowers in the front row, Yeah. So there we go.
Well, listen, I think what we need to do is reach out to World Rugby and see if we can get the director of referees on the program. And
that's the problem. That's the problem, Pemby. You're asking the director of refereeing. We can ask him what's going on.
Isn't he in charge?
But who? Yeah. Well, but is he in charge? Who decides what the game looks like? Is it the referees? Shouldn't be the referees. Like, who decides what the game's meant to look like?
Is there a shape of the game committee? I don't know. I'll have to have a look.
I don't know.
We'll have to investigate. We'll investigate.
We just need to know if the scrum's part of the future or not. That's all.
Well,
because
it can't not. Like, come on, seriously. Like, if you're
going to blow free at critical moments in the game, you're just going to blow a free kick for someone's foot placement. You haven't even packed the scrum. The scrum's not even packed. It's like to go free kick when you haven't even tried to have the scrum. It's not that hard. Like you're telling both teams you got to do. There's like 3 phases to the engagement. You're telling them what to do. It can't be that hard. Like, it really can't. Now, I get the teams have got to take responsibility, but you get away with it once, but you can't. It can't just be a repeated free kickathon. Like, it just can't. You got to allow the contest. If there's no contest at scrum, where is it?
Yeah.
We're going the way of other codes.
Yeah. No. Well. All right, well, let's leave it there because we're not going to solve that problem today. But, let's see if we can get some answers about what that direction is and who are we going to get those answers from. I don't know. Leave it to me. I'll see if I can turn somebody up and see if we can have a conversation with them about the future of the scrum in rugby because clearly to differentiate our game, it is it's a central element, a central component of the game of rugby, and it needs to be front and centre. And you do need to have those contests in order to, make the game rugby. Without a scrum contest, what is it? So there we go. So Eddie Jones, it looked a bit hot and heavy over there in Sacramento, the Pacific Nations Cup. We're heading towards, there's a quarterfinal between Samoa and USA, which I think probably decides who finishes last. And then the semi-finals, you take on Tonga, Fiji takes on Canada. But more from a broad point of view so far, the Pacific Nations Cup, how have you assessed it and the contribution that it's made to continuing to develop the quality of rugby at this tier of the game?
Well, for these countries that aren't in the major competitions such as the Rugby Championship and Six Nations, it's an important competition because we get to play against teams around the same ranking in a tournament. Yeah, it's the first time I think America's hosted a tournament and they've got a lot of work to do. The pitches you train on aren't good enough. They're doing their best. But it's going to be a challenge for them for the World Cup. They've obviously got a number of years, but there's a fair bit to do. We played at a ground that was maybe 68 wide, maybe 100 dead ball to dead ball. If I was able to show the camera in my hotel room, it was bigger than the dressing room. Trying to fit 23 blokes in when it's 35, where 30 degrees is, it's stretching it, But one of the great things at the end of the game, this bloke walked on, USA T-shirt, Wallaby peak hat. You know who it was?
Who was it?
The great Simon Poitier.
The king.
Because his son, and it's one of the good things. This is one of the great things about rugby. He's a young kid that played for Randwick. Wanted to play for Australia, hasn't been given a Super Rugby opportunity, and has decided to throw his bid in with America. He must qualify through his mother. So he's playing. He's now getting the opportunity to play international rugby for the USA. He rips in. He's just like his old man. Plenty of aggression. Challenges to break down hard. Got sin bin for a high tackle, which again, was either here nor there. But Simon was so proud, and it was great to see his young fella do well. So it was a really nice moment.
Yeah. And for you, for your Japanese team, how are they coming along? You're happy with what you're seeing? Another good effort?
Yeah, no, really good. We got out quickly, scored some points. I was talking to Ewen, and then the hard bit guts for us, where we've got to play tougher rugby, and we're just learning. We've got a young team, we're learning how to play a little bit tougher for a period of time, and we did really well. We've got a young captain who's never captained anything in his life, never been captain of a marbles team. But he's doing a fantastic job, and he's one hell of a player, Warner Durns. Like he could challenge to be one of the best locks in the world. He's a very good player and doing a great job as captain. So they're having fun, mate. It's a good young team. We'll rip into Tonga this week in Denver, which is a mile above sea level. So we just arrived. Everyone's got a Denver Broncos T-shirt on. They had a win today, so the bar's packed. There's plenty going on in Denver.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to watching those matches, and it's a good thing that here in Australia we can actually see the Pacific Nations Cups matches. And they're on at a good time as well, so you don't have to get up in the middle of the night to watch the game. But listen, just before we move on, just to have a quick chat about the women's game, just this issue around player availability. Ronan O'Gara made some comments after their loss to Bordeaux in the first round, where Will Skelton didn't play, and he was asked about Will Skelton, and the quote from Ronan O'Gara was, "Australia holds all the cards," which I don't understand what that means. And obviously we're now going to have, Tom Liner out for a period of time because of his concussion. James O'Connor was due to go to Leicester at the end of next week's game in Sydney against Argentina. But clearly there's now going to be discussions between Leicester, Jeff Parling, who is the former Wallaby assistant coach, who's now the head coach at Leicester, and the Australians to, can they keep James O'Connor in Australia for the Bledisloe series against New Zealand? Eddie Jones, where are we at with all this availability? Because I do know that a couple of weeks ago you did say that your Japanese team, there are 20 players that are unavailable for selection for different reasons. Some of them are playing in the French competition, but where are we at with this player availability, and what might look like some sort of reasonable solution so that the people who are paying the wages, the club teams, are getting what they need, but at the same time, the national teams are getting what they need for their international competition? I'll throw that to you first and then get your view.
Well, I think, if you look how soccer have eventually managed it, they have clear international windows where, generally speaking, club soccer doesn't play, and that seems to have ensured that every player is available that should be available. And I think that has to happen in rugby. That's the only solution, that you have clear international windows where club rugby doesn't play and the players are made available. And that might mean less test matches, which would then impact on the financial situations of certainly a number of unions. But I think that's the only way you'd really get a clear situation, because at the moment, if you're La Rochelle and you're paying Will Skelton to be your main player, then your season started, like he goes off and plays for Australia, like no one wins. They don't win. La Rochelle doesn't win. Australia obviously benefits. But La Rochelle, they're paying his money. And so, those French clubs, it's rumoured that they add incentives for the players not to go, whatever. And you can't, blame them for doing that because they want the best players and their survival is based on their clubs winning. So I think the only way forward is clear international windows, mate.
Okay. But when Ronan O'Gara says Australia holds all the cards, what does he mean by that?
Well, he's a cheeky bugger, Ronan, isn't he? Like, I think he's just trying to take the problem away from him now.
Okay. Yeah, I still don't quite understand what he's saying.
Well, you look at the situation. They've allowed him to play, and now he's not fit to play in the first game, and he gets beaten. Right, so that's not a good start for a club like La Rochelle. And I don't know whether it was home or away. Particularly if it was a home game, it'd be
I was just looking it up. It was away. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't. They weren't expecting to win anyway. The problem was that I was just looking here. They were playing Begla Bordeaux, so in a way, it's a bit of a local derby there, the sort of coastal town bragging right sort of thing. So I'm thinking it might have been that, but yeah.
So Ewan, do you have a view on this player availability issue?
Well, clearly having separate windows, but you've got, the European season's long because you've got the European Cup in there and it sort of extends everything. So they've got a big part of the pie. If you made it look like a pie, what's the pie? You've got this overlap. I never negotiated any sort of availability like that. I was cut and dried. If you're in Australia and eligible for Australia, you had to be playing Super Rugby. So then you get picked. If you buggered off overseas, I just didn't pick you. I didn't think about you. So that's just sort of how it worked. Unless you're saying you're going to come back, and then we'd talk. But you still had to get back to be able to play. Then it started to change that. If you're going to be back in 3 years' time and you signed a contract with the Waratahs, then that's good enough to be able to pick. So it started getting a bit messy from the test perspective when you started doing things like that. I assume that Australia must negotiate, they must compensate or at least ensure, create some sort of insurance situation where the player, if he is injured, that there's compensation that goes back to the club. So I'm assuming there's some financial transaction that goes on for that availability. But in the end, this is not. You can't just make it about the union or the club. It's actually the player and their managers. They have to. It's like it doesn't matter what contract you sign in life. You have to understand when you sign a contract, you get benefits and you lose benefits. That's just the nature of a contract. You give things up. You might get compensation, but you give away your rights to privacy or the use of your image or whatever it is. So when a player signs to play for a club, he needs to accept the fact that his opportunities to represent his country might be limited by the nature of signing that contract. So you can't hide, you can't get the best of everything. So I'm a little bit more pragmatic that you're aware of that. So it's disappointing, but the player and his manager made that decision. And so that's what it is. It's not great from Australian perspective, but the reality is they signed the contract under those terms. So you can't induce someone to break the contract. All you can do is negotiate around it. And clearly that's what's been going on for the last couple of years. But back in my day, I just didn't get involved in that. I just kept picking the next players locally. So you made it quite clear that if you do go overseas, you're not in the selection frame.
But
that's changing now. But
it is, isn't it? Because if you're the Wallaby coach, Tom Hooper and Len Ikitau will be both playing for Exeter, and clearly they'd be both players.
Signed, when did they?
I think before they signed, before there was this change.
Hooper was playing off the bench for the Brumbies.
Yeah.
So he's thinking, his agent's going, I've got this big offer for you. He's on the bench for the Brumbies. So he's thinking, I'm nowhere in the pecking order. So they're the conversation. That's where you got to keep looking deep into the list and make sure you've got but now he's like, he's in the team. So things change, but you've got to, it's frustrating, but I don't know. The only solution is, as Eddie says, you create the windows, and then the World Rugby can manage it by virtue of the fact that if it's a test window or a club window, that's all you got. So there's a lot more games now. Every week we're talking about Women's World Cups are sort of one-off, but you've got the Pacific, and now the French stuff started, the European stuff starting again. So there's just rugby going on all the time. So it's going to be hard to find those windows, and be fair about it too. That's the other thing. I mean, as I say, take the pie and you look at those French clubs, and they're starting now and they'll finish in June, late June. That's a big slice of the pie dedicated to French club rugby, But
yes, I can't see how those windows are going to be sorted out.
No, I don't see it. I don't see a short. There's no short-term solution. No. In the end, you got to say, well, you got to forfeit something, and that's what happens if you make a decision to play for someone. Doesn't matter who it is. You might be forfeiting something else, and you got to go with your eyes open. Yeah.
Very good. We'll quickly.
If I could,
go on, mate.
Can I just add to that, Pemby?
Yep. You can, mate.
Saying. So if you look at the case study of Richie Mwanga, right? So at the end of the 2019 or 23 World Cup,
the last one.
He signed for Toshiba for 3 years, right? He's made a commitment to play for them. He's declined to play for the All Blacks, and he's just 100% committed himself to Toshiba for 3 years. Now, he's made a decision at the end of this season to go back and try to play for the All Blacks. I think the way he's conducted himself is fantastic, because he made that decision knowing that he'd have to give up playing for the All Blacks, but at the same time he's probably getting remunerated pretty well by Toshiba, even though they're broke. He's probably still getting paid well. And he's really conducted himself well. And same with, guys who make that commitment to play overseas. They're getting extra money. They know that's the situation. That's what they've bought in. No one's twisting their arm to make them sign it. If you want to play for your country, you've got to stay in the country if that's the country's rules.
Yes, but anyway, in Australia, that's now no longer the rule, and players will be available for selection, and I'd be very surprised if coaches aren't going to be taking the best players wherever they can find them.
It's not coaches, it's the player managers. They're the ones that are hawking them around. Seriously, that's what happens. Like there weren't player managers, 15 years ago was a bit different, or 20 years ago. They just approach the player directly, but they're going to go around and they'll make it look good, because that's the only way the player manager earns money is by signing a contract. Yeah. He gets the player to sign a contract, he gets a percentage. That's what happens. So it's no good if there's no churn. The player managers have got to create churn in the market, but the player has to be strong enough to say, I like playing for the All Blacks, or I like playing for the Wallabies, I'm going to stay here. I'll take a haircut, but I prefer to stay here and play for them because it's just better for me. Other people go, I wouldn't mind living in Europe for a while. That's a decision you made. Yeah. So but there's a cost to that. There's a cost to that. Simple as that.
So listen, boys, we're coming up against time, and I do want to get to a couple of questions from the audience. So we won't go into the Women's Rugby World Cup other than to say that I think there's a shiver gone down the spine of all English fans after the performance of the Black Ferns this morning, who were outstanding in demolishing Ireland 40-0, and a very enjoyable weekend watching a lot of the women's rugby. And the quarterfinals are now set. New Zealand against South Africa, Canada against Australia, France v Ireland, and England v Scotland. And then the other big news is that R360 has gone on pause, as best as we can work out. No one's put a name to it, but they're saying that it won't be until next year that the R360 goes to World Rugby to seek permission for whatever that tournament is going to look like into the future. So that was news that was revealed in The Guardian. So quickly, just a couple of comments. Sifamandla Nakobo says, highly respect the insight of these two coaches. They just make bloody sense. And Martin Tyler, maybe it's the great Martin Tyler, says, great and interesting insights and discussion. Thanks from a Bok. Well, there you go. It's not the Martin Taylor. So, question, great chat. Would love to know what Eddie and Ewen thought about the relationship between the idea of a national style in rugby, i.e. Australia plays running rugby, and evolving the game based on the present rules, player types, etc. One of the really frustrating things about the rugby public in Australia is a reflex antagonism to kicking, and that filters down to the way our players want to play, when in reality you need to kick well and often kick a lot more to be competitive international side these days. And kicking isn't boring. Look at Bordeaux, and even in rugby league they actually kick a lot. We just have this inborn prejudice in Aussie rugby, particularly towards box kicking. How do we make the kicking more core to rugby skill development and values in Australia? I'll throw that to you first, Ewen McKenzie.
Well, I think it might be more about the quality of kicking. If you can kick effectively and a kick's only as good as its chase, for instance. So if it's some sort of attacking kick, it's only as good as its chase. So it's not just the kick. So it has to. You can make it part of the strategy, or it can be a last resort. If it's kicking as a last resort, then can look a bit aimless and a bit pointless. So there may be some educational that, but I don't see when you look at the games, when you look at games and you look at games statistically, kicking's got to be part of the solution to winning. And so the lower kicking games tend to end up in losses at the moment anyway. It does change, but that's, you need to be up. Most teams are kicking up in the high 20s per game. And that's part of, that's part of being part of a winning strategy. But you've got to look at kicking in the chase, or kicking for the reason for the kick is the key. So and maybe Australians just aren't that, or some people aren't that sort of aware about what the strategy might be behind it. But I'm a little bit the same at the moment. I mentioned the Caterpillar Fest. I mean, I do find that it's not so much the kick; it's the setup for the kick that I find a bit tedious. That's just me personally at the moment, but that's the problem in every game. So it's not just unique to Australia.
And what about for you, Eddie Jones, in terms of getting Australians more engaged in kicking? I actually think it's probably it's changing a little, because we are seeing your Suwalis and your Jorgensens and these players, Corey Toole, very good in the air, which, is part of the attacking style of the Australian team. But where do you see kicking as part of the Australian style of play, and how can it become better understood?
Well, I think no one ever complains when you win. If you win 20 games and you kick too much, then fans will start complaining. I can remember with England, we played against France, and we kicked the ball 40 times and we won, and we got booed.
Right.
And because we come to the end of people enjoying that style. And there's a tipping point. So how do you get better at kicking? For Australians, you need highly skilled kickers. Like, no one ever complained about the way Joey John kicks or Cleary kicks. And I'm just looking at our stats on the weekend. So USA are a data-based team. They basically play data ball. They have the number of rucks to kicks. We kicked the ball 25 times and scored 7 tries. They kicked the ball 17 times and scored 2 tries. Like, kicking's just got to be seen as part of the game, and you got to be good at it. You got to be good at the execution of the kick, and you got to be good at the decision making of the kick. And the more you practice that from a young age, the better you are. So it's making sure young players kick, 9s kick, 10s kicks, 15s kick. 12 and 13s have got grubber kicks, 13s. The wingers can do chip kicks or long kicks, get them highly skilled, no one complains.
All right. Now, the final question from Brian Moore. Razors copping partly because of retaining players who haven't performed. Does sentimentality creep into selections? Eddie Jones.
I think what can happen, and I've certainly fallen into it, and I've fallen into the other way as well, that when you've had players that have won for you, you can hang on to them a little bit too long. And the hardest thing is dropping those players. It's definitely a factor. It can be a factor. And you've got to be conscious of that as a coach. I think I told you I had a conversation with Wayne Bennett when first year I coached the Brumbies, we didn't have a good year.
Yeah.
I went and saw him and he said, look, I'm going to tell you a couple of things that you'll remember the rest of your life. And one of them was, he said, if you got a good young player and you got an older player that's still good, get rid of him a year early and promote the younger player in that year. And then he becomes your player for the next 8 years. And I think that's essentially right.
It's hard though, isn't it? As you say, like if someone's delivered for you and yeah. Well, I suppose you made that point before, I think, even about, Beauden Barrett, that perhaps he's not quite the player that he was back in 2023 as he is now, although that left foot kick of his on the weekend was a pretty tidy skill execution. But Ewen McKenzie, what about you? Are you the sentimental type would you own up to holding on to players longer than you should have?
I don't know when you say, yeah, you're talking more probably contractually than sort of week to week. No, I've always been the sort of, you got to keep moving, and I do think that what the so-called professional game has brought is that players aren't going to retire. You have to retire them. You have to move them on. So They're not going to retire because and I've been in teams where I've had the highest played player sitting on the bench for most of the season. I'm not going to name names, but that's what's happened. So that's not a scenario that you can sustain in a squad environment, because obviously someone else is playing better and starting. So you have to make decisions around that. And so I've done that from early on, So I don't think that's it's just one of the parts of the job. So.
Very good. All right. Well, Ewen McKenzie and Eddie Jones, a big thanks. We've run a little bit longer today because there's been lots to talk about. But before we do go, I do want to recognise the passing of one of the greats of Australian rugby administration, a former president of ACT Rugby Union, a former board member of the Australian Rugby Union, David Lewis. He was someone who all of us actually had a lot to do with in the early days of the Brumbies. He's a tireless contributor to the game as a team manager, as an administrator, and he certainly dedicated his life to the game of rugby in the ACT and southern New South Wales. He was a champion man, and he'll be greatly missed, David Lucy. It was always such a delight to catch up with him about the place. He passed after complications recovering from lung cancer. So to David Lewis, we tip our hat to you, David, and remember you for the great contribution you made to our wonderful sport. So David Lewis, rest in peace. So big thanks again to Eddie Jones and Ewen McKenzie. And to you, the audience, another big thanks for your ongoing engagement and your enjoyment of the content that we are creating. And just to remember that your voice is crucial to shaping not only the future of the game, but the future of this podcast. So please keep the comments coming, whether they're on Instagram, on YouTube, on TikTok, and keep the questions coming so we can put those to Eddie Jones and Ewen McKenzie. Don't forget to subscribe on your favourite podcatcher, and always leave us a rating or a review if you could, whether it's on Spotify or Apple. It does help us to be found. So a big thanks for all of your support so far. You can also subscribe to our Substack for exclusive content and blogs and behind-the-scenes insights, and indeed full access to all the resources that we create here. The link for that Substack will be in the show notes. So we'll be back on Wednesday with our preview of the Women's Rugby World Cup, our other special edition of Rugby Unity, where Bella McKenzie speaks to the Australian co-captain Emily Chancer, will be on air tomorrow, and Eddie Jones and Ewen McKenzie will return on Friday for our big preview show for all that is happening in the world of rugby this weekend. So, Again, audience, a big thanks to you. A big thanks to Eddie Jones and Ewen McKenzie. But for the moment, please be kind to each other. My name is David Pembroke, and it's bye for now.